Welcome, everybody, back to Let's Get Wicked, the show where we talk about nothing but the game Villainous. I'm your host, Joker Jonesy here, and I am joined by my friend, Wero the Great here, friend. Welcome back. How you doing today?
Hey, thank you. I'm doing as well as I can given the current situation that we're not allowed to talk about. If you
Yeah,
guys want
no,
to get
I,
in on
I, I
that.
know, I get it. I had to take a walk earlier today, and I was just, or not had to, but I was like, I have to go to stretch my legs. I'm getting a
Yeah,
little cabin fever right now.
yeah,
Um,
but
but just a smidge. But we're indoors, we're safe, we're healthy, everything is a-okay.
as
We're here to
I
talk
hope
about some
for.
Villainous. That's what we're here to talk
Yes,
about today. And what we're actually be talking about is a very interesting topic today. Where I've actually wanted to do this for a while, and I actually think that myself and Wero would probably be one of the best to talk about because we're both in the university environment where we have to do lots of research and teaching and interacting with people. And that's teaching Villainous to players of all different backgrounds, um, which I think is important because with this game, I think a lot of what makes it special is kind of learning to discover all the unique little things that we all kind of go after about in the Discord chat of like all the tips and tricks and stuff. But from a newcomer perspective, you can't really kind of get the grasp of all of that from the get-go. And
definitely.
yeah, and I want to touch base on that today because I think when you want to introduce this game to somebody new, you need to try to approach it in the best way possible, especially with some of our topics recently talking about fate or doing the fate action, how much you should be aggressively doing that. But I think this goes very much along with what we want to talk about today. So, um,
Right.
so one of the first things I want to kind of talk about, and I'll actually let you kind of take over this a little bit, Wero, is like what when you want to introduce this game to a group of people, how many players do you think is the magic little number to start teaching this game at?
So I have taught this game to quite a lot of people. As you said, I am also in the university system. I am a graduate student, but the school that I'm at, they have a nice little board game club that meets every Friday. Mainly undergrads, but a few grad people, and even a few community members show up. And so I bring Villainous every week. I used to bring Dominion every week, but there's too much to lug around now at this point, and not every people don't always play Dominion every week. It's a little harder to teach to new people. But
Sad
for
face.
Villainous, I get Villainous played every week. Sometimes it's my friends are like, "Hey, we're playing Villainous," and I'm like, okay, sure. Or sometimes it's like, "Hey, are you looking for a game? You want to try this one?" And all I need to say is, "You play as a Disney villain," and that gets their attention. But I have taught this to people one on one, 3 player, 4 player, 5 player, 6 player games. And honestly, any of them can work, and it kind of depends on the group. If it's more experienced gamers, really, honestly, for any of them, any number can work. But probably for more experienced gamers, you want a lower number, like 2 or 3 or maybe 4, so that they can get more turnaround and they get to do stuff more often. But with people who aren't as familiar with games, probably a larger number, I would say, because then um, they have a bit more time to think about what they're doing, and they can also see sort of the variety of what's going on, and they can see more people doing their own thing, and so they can kind of watch and see, okay, they're doing that, so maybe I should do something a little similar.
Interesting. I like that take because one of the things when I introduce this to groups of people, we usually do it at parties. And obviously there's lots of people there, so usually you get like 5 or 6 people around a table and you start playing. And I like the fact that you said the downtime thing because I think one of the things that I struggle with when I try to teach this to larger groups of people is that since there is so much downtime and people are still trying to like figure out all the little gimmicks and stuff, and you don't necessarily want to sit there and like dictate exactly what they should do based off the cards that they have in their hand because that just kind of takes the fun out of it. But with that extra downtime, do you feel like they think more, or do you feel like they get bored faster? Or not
I,
necessarily bored,
I
but
think
you know,
I think for people who aren't as familiar with board gaming, they probably will think a little bit more. For people who are more experienced with gaming, it will bore them. And honestly, I find myself getting a little bored in the downtime because I usually have figured out, okay, this is what I'm going to do on my next turn.
Right.
Except with like some of the newer, perfectly wretched villains where there's a lot more to think about. But yeah, the also with the larger group number, there isn't like as much fading directed at one person. So if I were teaching this one on one to someone and it was someone who had never really done board games before, I would either have to ease off of fading on them or just absolutely ruin their day. Whereas in like a 6 player game, it usually turns into, okay, this person hasn't been faded yet. We'll fade them. We'll throw the fade token their way. And it kind of gets spread around a little bit and no one really gets swamped. Or they all decide to gang up on me because they know that I actually know how to play the game.
Yeah, no, that happens to me too all the time. My Scar never wins in a 5 or 6 player game. Never does. I like that. I like that thought process right there. I think because it happens the same thing with my groups too, where when it comes to fading, someone always like everyone wants to kind of spread the love around in terms of fading and kind of see all the different heroes, but like when you're teaching it to somebody new in a one-on-one perspective, obviously you don't want to be super aggressive with the fate up front, but how do you approach it to make sure that you don't make the player feel like they're playing a solitaire game? Because when I've introduced this to people in a one-on-one format before, like I don't aggressively fate like you said, but there's also that kind of thing of like, sometimes if you want to start get moving faster, so like I'll point out Hades, for example. Let's say that you've got a Titan on the board and you want to show that you're moving them to the location. Then you need to go to Olympus and then move them again, but then you're going to fate them again. And obviously, once you have Titans on the board, you're going to be wanting to go back and forth between those spaces often. How do you kind of get around situations where you feel like when you're teaching this to people that you feel like you kind of already have to fate kind of based off their goal? Because like with me, if I play Scar, you know, if I'm going to be vanquishing a lot, I'm going to be moving to the Gorge. And the Gorge always has a vanquish and a fate action available to you. So, you know, that's a good point. I would like to see what your thoughts are on that.
So as far as that, I think you kind of have to carefully choose who you are going to play when playing against a very new player who has never played like board games before. So you want to pick a villain that isn't necessarily going to be doing that a lot. So like maybe Maleficent would be a good one because she can just hop between the forest and Briar Rose's cottage. Or like even Scar, like when you're still trying to find Mufasa, you're probably going to hop between the Elephant Graveyard and Pride Rock, and you can ease up a little bit. Whereas you kind of have to gauge that they need a bit of time figuring out what they're doing. So you kind of have to let them play solitaire and kind of keep an eye on them. So I was teaching someone who did have a lot of experience with tabletop gaming previously, and I guess I didn't fade him enough because he figured out pretty quickly that he was fading me a lot. I think he was playing Hades, I was playing Scar, and I realized a little too late that I should have been fading him more often and not been taking it easy on him, and he just waltzed all his Titans up to Mount Olympus because he figured out pretty quick what he needed to do. So you kind of need to watch what they're doing. I mean, you should always be watching what your opponent is doing, but with newer players especially, to not necessarily when they're reaching their objective, because if they're new to the game, they're probably going to take their time doing that. But when to give them more of a challenge.
I gotcha. I like that. So you as the teacher are kind of adjusting the difficulty for the new player on the fly. I kind of like that concept. Speaking of characters, this is kind of always a topic of discussion, even in our Discord channel, is what do you think would be, and there's some obvious answers, but there's also some, if you want to bring some variety to your early games, how do you, especially in a 6-player game, who do you think is probably the best characters to start with to teach? Obviously Prince John, obviously Maleficent. Those are two very easy target choices, I would say, from my perspective.
So you want to give the new player or for you to play when you're teaching someone else?
New players. Let's start there. Let's start with new players.
Honestly, I usually just let them pick whoever they want. I'll explain a bit about what they do. Usually, they just want to like, oh, I saw this one's movie, I want to play them. Honestly, they pick Hades a lot, which I
Which
think
makes
is
sense.
fine because Hades is pretty straightforward. Um, or they'll pick Maleficent is pretty popular. Um, and okay, the only one I usually won't do in a first game is Yzma, just because she's so different, and
Yeah.
it'd be kind of silly to be like, okay, this is how the Fate deck works, but hey, this character doesn't do that. She does something different. So I just tend to not do Yzma in a first game. But other than that, I let them pick whoever they want. Although if it is a more complicated character like Ursula or Radigan or Evil Queen, I'll just say so. This one has a bit more moving parts. Um,
Okay. I I always kind of struggle because, and obviously you've probably worked with this
um,
before, is that you have lots of characters that people really enjoy. So like a perfect
mm,
example, I always bring out a Scar. And
mm,
Scar, not necessarily, I would say, is difficult. His objective is very straightforward and what you need to do, but actually accomplishing it as like a new player, there is a lot of moving parts to that.
right.
So it's I always kind of struggle with that because I don't necessarily want to limit players to having to pick like the introductory characters, but I also want to make sure that they can still have fun with their favorite character in the same
Right.
process. It's like when I teach people fighting games, like let's say Street Fighter, like usually the base is like Ryu and Ken because they kind of got all the stuff and they're pretty easy to understand, but like getting more advanced or let the players choose the cooler characters or the people they want to be, it can be sometimes a challenge. Um,
Well, so I think like there's a difference here between Villainous and like something like a fighting game or even like Super Smash Brothers. Like I've tried to learn Super Smash Brothers a couple times, and maybe it's just because I didn't grow up with a console. I have no idea what the hell I'm doing. And so I'm just going to keep playing Bowser because he throws fire breath, and I have figured out how to do that. But that is more like I think the difference there is that um, with a fighting game, everything your character can do is always available to you. You just need to know what buttons you have to press to do it.
yeah.
And learning all those button pressings for multiple characters can be a bit of a chore. Whereas with Villainous, you can only ever do what's in front of you. So you only have access to those four locations, sometimes three if you're playing a locked villain, and you have the four cards in your hand. Your villain guide might say, hey, there's particular cards you want to mill for, but you just have what's in front of you and you got to work with that. And so I think it's not quite the same. I think you can just sort of hand any villain off to a new player, except perhaps Yzma.
Okay, I gotcha. Speaking of the villain guides, so the when I've introduced this in larger groups, the villain guides usually kind of go a little untouched, and I don't know if it's just because of the people I personally play with, but like, not to say that the villain guides don't do a very good job at explaining like some of the tricks and stuff with the characters, but there are some things that you quickly will pick up with some other characters if you're experienced with board games that like, oh, if you're playing Ratigan, once you have the Mouse Queen out, if you got the airship and you just push that thing all the way to the end, you are set in stone. You're ready to go. I don't know if like, I don't remember if the villain guide specifically states that's like what that tool is useful for. But like when it comes to those types of tricks, how do you kind of address those with the new players without trying to completely hold their hand? Because there is that factor of self-discovery. I think that's really good about this game where like when players start realizing the different tricks that they can do with cards, it kind of ignites that fire. At least with me
Mm-hmm.
personally, but I've seen it with other people before where all of a sudden they're like, oh, I can move a Titan all the way to Olympus in one turn. I can do that. Those types of things, those types of like stick out moments. So like how
Yes.
do you approach like teaching those tricks?
Okay, so you brought up a couple of things. As far as like the villain guides, I've honestly had like the exact opposite experience. Whether it's like a new player or even like a really experienced tabletop gamer, they will always read all the way through the villain guide. Like I'll hand them the villain guide, and the new player has no idea what the hell they're doing. So they're gonna like, okay, what am I even doing? The experienced players are like, okay, even if they've played villainous before, they just haven't played this villain before. Like when I brought up Perfectly Wretched, my friends who have played villainous before were like, okay, give me that villain guide. Let me look at it. I want to see how this villain plays. So I haven't really had that experience of just ignoring the villain guide. But as far as the little tips and tricks that may not necessarily be in the villain guide, I'll usually let the self discovery happen. But if, for example, I see that a player is discarding a really important card that they kind of should hold on to, I'll be like, before you do that.
Yeah, before
So,
you
like,
do
if I
that.
see Scar discarding an Injustice or Radigan discarding a Devious or the Airship, I'm like, just hold up, mate. Sure, you want to do that. Let me just explain what this is doing for you. And usually they'll like pick it back. Either they'll pick it back and oh, okay, or they're like, no, I want to do this my way. So it is what it is. I'd like you can give advice, but they may or may not take it, and that's fine.
Yeah, and sometimes you have to accept that. I remember I was playing a game recently, and I was teaching the new Perfectly Wretched characters, and someone discarded both of the Stabbington boys, and I was like, wait, why are you doing that? And they were like, because they're ugly. And I'm like, oh no. I was just like, oh dear Lord. They're going to be really useful. You should probably hold on to them.
And the
But
aesthetics are important.
yeah, they're very important for defensive purposes as well as trying to defeat Rapunzel again later. I laughed so hard in that scenario. It was absolutely hilarious.
Yeah.
Um,
So one thing I actually wanted to bring up is recently, especially with like the release of Perfectly Wretched, there's been a lot of sort of discussion both on Discord and also on Board Game Geek about wordings and what cards are supposed to mean as
I got
opposed to
you.
what designer intent is. And you had had a conversation with one of the developers, and she brought up that the keyword they were thinking of was imaginative,
Yes.
that they have kind of purposely left some things ambiguous so that if a player wants to pick it up casually, they're not there. I guess the designer intent is the new player shouldn't be intimidated by very particular, unambiguous wordings. They should be free to kind of interpret things.
Yeah.
I wanted to feel what your take on that was.
So, I'll try to dance around this as best as I can because I also don't want to come across what I was told in a negative light because one of the things as a very veteran board game player, I really and I know you are too because obviously you played a lot of Dominion. I enjoy when things are clearly laid out to me so I understand what it's supposed to do, and if it does break the engine, it specifies it. And the thing with this, though, is that they want to make sure that when a new player comes in and they read a card, they can use that card basically however they please. They don't want to limit the amount that a new player can be able to achieve when looking at what they have in front of them. Kind of like what you said earlier, where they got their 4 locations and they got their 4 cards. And sometimes, especially for us veteran people, we like our specificity. But the thing is that when you do that, you are actually limiting the amount of players as well as like how much someone can actually interpret what you're teaching them at that time. Because they might get really confused. Because like I remember looking at Beauty Sleep. I think Beauty Sleep might be the card with the most text in the game. I could be wrong though.
I think Kronk might have more.
Yeah, but
They
like
both have a lot.
yeah, but when you have that much text on a card, you have to think about and granted, Yzma's a horrible example because she's someone you should not introduce to early game. But even if it's like their second or third game, that is a lot to take in. There is a lot of information that you have to read on that card and interpret and understand what it's specifically supposed to do. And I personally feel that using these types of interpretations helps, and I've talked about this show all the time, helps bring out options because I want to make sure that when new players jump in, they don't feel like they're stuck. And when someone feels like they're stuck, you can't really, they all of a sudden no longer enjoy the game, because when you get, it's, I know you're not a fighting game person, but for those of you who do understand, it's like if you get stuck in the corner in a fighting game, you don't know how to get out of the corner, that type of situation. I don't want the players to get stuck in corners, but when you open up the rules interpretation like that, it helps make it so players can do things the way they can. And it also makes it more fun for them to also like do creative ways to approach how a card should be played. I know one of the hot topics recently that we've been kind of discussing in our Discord as well as on Board Game Geek is the whole concept of like how many allies, you can use to vanquish. And the whole reason why this really kind of got brought up is that Pete in particular can really benefit from using extra allies to put them back in his deck to help with stuff like play a game. But the rules don't necessarily say, you can't use more allies than you're supposed to. And the thing is, because they don't say that, the way that the designer intent behind that is that they want players to go in and be like, if I want to do that, I can. However, is that always the smartest thing to do? No. It's the same thing also with the interpretation of the new move conditions, where they don't specify where the movement is coming from, or like what realm or whatnot, because there are a few villains, especially in the new set, where you can move items around and stuff, and we might interpret that as, hey, that move condition can only be used if something is moved around in the current player's realm. But it was also officially stated that could be moved around anywhere, and it's done like that on purpose, because we don't want that to be specific, because by saying specifically in that player's realm, that is more text that you have to add onto the card to make it more, specific, which means that's more rules that a new player has to learn and understand. And granted, those rules aren't necessarily complicated, but I've seen some cards in some card games before that have lots of text, and I play a lot of board games with my dad. And he's pretty good at learning board games and stuff like that. But when a card has a lot of text on it, he's sitting there and he's like, all right, son, what is this supposed to do? I know, actually, even funny enough, I was playing King of Tokyo, a little dice game about monsters taking over Tokyo recently. And that game specifically has cards in it that are like power-up cards. And there's one card in particular that has loads of text. I couldn't tell you what the card name was. But I remember we were playing in my family, and we were looking at the card, and we're like, this game's Yahtzee chucking, and there's a card that has more text than some book reports. I don't want that in my card games. So I guess that's my 2 cents on it. You can speak your 2 cents. I'm okay with hearing your thoughts, because I know you probably have some things to say on this too.
So definitely, sometimes more words is just more words, and you don't need that much text. So in the Dominion community, the designer of Dominion's pretty active on the Dominion Discord. He likes to chime in with what his particular thoughts are, and like in the playtesters group, there's discussion about like, hey, how should this be worded? But also, so the designer of Dominion never looks at fan cards. There's a number of reasons why designers should never look at fan anything, but the main thing being, if you then make something similar, well, do the fan creators get some kind of copyright anything? And it's just a whole mess. But in the Dominion community, there have been a whole bunch of fan-made cards, and there tends to be a running trend of making them overcomplicated, because usually what I found, and even like in the burgeoning Villainous fan-made stuff, when you are first starting out learning a board game or a card game, and you want to make your own card or villain or whatever, you're usually trying to extrapolate from what you've already seen. And from what you've already seen, using just the mechanics that you already know, usually the design space has already been pretty well excavated. And anything more you want to do within just that design space is going to necessarily have to be more complicated. But more complicated doesn't necessarily mean more interesting. It can also just be wall of text, or it can just be horribly broken or horribly imbalanced. Whereas with the designers, so both with Dominion and with Villainous, and I've really appreciated this with Villainous so far, is when they make new stuff, they usually add a new mechanic or something else so that it can stay simple. And with Dominion in particular, not so. There is an expansion that came out this month. I think it's been delayed for the thing we can't talk about.
Right.
But a couple years ago, the other most recent set, Renaissance, was very deliberately made as simple as possible. Like wordings were kept as simple as possible. If ever the text grew so big that a smaller font size was needed, it was cut. So it was deliberately made. We're going to keep this as simple as possible. We're going to use keywords where we can. We're going to make wording succinct. We're not going to get too complicated. Just because a few previous sets had gotten a little more wording, a little more complicated, and got a little more finagly with using extra cards that weren't necessarily in the supply and tokens and things like that. And it was just a bit too complicated for some people. And so there was a kind of, well, this is a return to form. There's new cards, they explore new mechanics, but they're easy to parse, they're simple. But on the one hand, while you do have that idea of sometimes more words is more words, you don't want to overcomplicate things, it is very intimidating to just look at wall of text. You can still, there is a balance to be struck between having clear, concise wordings, but also having specific wordings. And while I definitely do appreciate the intent being aimed for of being imaginative with the wordings, being accessible to new players to the wording, allowing for multiple interpretations for the wording, for me, the part that sticks in my craw is the possibility of multiple interpretations. Like, I'm cool with, let's have it be simple and concise, let's have it be open for new players, but I still think that somewhere there should be some FAQ or rule book that is like, okay, here's what it actually does. Because maybe those casual players don't really care and they'll just do whatever they want to do. But if we are ever going to do like an official tournament or something like that, there has to be an agreed upon, this is what happens. Because if you don't have that, there's just going to be arguments where people are like, well, no, the card says that. Well, no, but the designer intent was that, but the card doesn't say that. And it kind of gets bad. So I do hope they at least give some concession to that side of things, of the wording shouldn't be so casual friendly that it is possible to be interpreted multiple conflicting ways.
I agree. I definitely agree on that because, you know, I've been talking about wanting to do a tournament for a while now in the Discord, and now since we've grown our community, I think it's more possible. And the thing I would hate to have happen is that when we're in the middle of a tournament and we have some weird situation pop up, we then have to have, you know, our players argue about how something is supposed to be interpreted. And granted, some of these scenarios are going to happen maybe not often. I think the biggest case is Yzma, and we're working on those issues right now, because she just breaks the game so much. And she makes it so few cards make it just hard to
doesn't
interpret.
even work for Ravensburger anymore.
Yeah, no. Which is that's the biggest issue. And I don't know if I brought this up on the show. I brought this up on the Discord, but one of the things I learned when I was in contact with some Ravensburger people is the fact that every time a rule has to get clarified, you have to understand that, and it's just the way that the IP works, what they have with Disney, is that when they decide on how something is supposed to be ruled, they have to tell Disney. Disney has to give the okay. Once they have that approved, then they can publicly say that. So there is a weird chain of command that even just as simple as like when I was trying to get some of the stuff clarified from the moving conditions, like that is the route that they have to go when they have to give that official like press type of answer. And sometimes I don't necessarily like those answers, but you know, they're also good too, you know? And I definitely think that down the road, we will get a giant FAQ, whether it's like an official thing in like a box or if it's something just on Board Game Geek as a thread. But I do think we will get that. I just don't think we're going to get it that soon, because one of the things I keep bringing up on the show is that this game is built and is targeted towards casual audience people who they're going to go to their Walmart, they're going to go to their Target, they're going to see something with the word Disney on it, and they will buy it because it's Disney. We even actually had this quick talk about, or not in the Discord, but how actually a lot of the game stores right now did not get a copy of Perfectly Wretched, but all the Walmarts and Targets did, just because the fact of how they have to allot all that stock to their current people, because that was their, with the licensing deals, that's the target audience they want to focus on. And just being very upfront, a lot of that target audience can care less about an FAQ. Some of them probably do, but not everybody. And I think that's what also makes it a little difficult is, especially from a development standpoint, you have to kind of weigh and balance like what you're going to put your resources into. And not to say, and I'm definitely not saying that it's like easy to make an FAQ doc, because obviously that's going to take a lot of work and to make sure that you have everything clarified. But you also have to know hey, if I'm going to spend this amount of time answering questions, that amount of time is no longer used to be creating the next villain.
Right.
There's also that weird balance of stuff.
And I think part of that may be because it is a Disney IP. Like if you look at like other games, like, and I keep bringing up Dominion, but this is the other game that I'm most familiar with. The designer is a board gaming geek through and through. Most of the playtesters are. The people coding and programming the online implementation, they are hardcore gamers. They are really into like the nitty gritty of rules, and there is an audience for that game, but it's not like they're beholden to anyone. So the designer, he can do whatever the fuck he wants to. He can make whatever card he wants to, and he'll just hand them off to his publishers. Like, okay, sure, cool. And then if someone asks him a question, he'll think about it and then give an answer. And if he wants to change his mind, he can do that. And that has happened before. There's been a couple of errata. Whereas now, so Prospero Hall was bought by Ravensburger and Funko, and then they also are beholden to Disney. So there is probably like more of like a chain of command and hierarchy that there are expectations on them. So it's not just, I'm sure the people at Prospero Hall and Ravensburger are also hardcore board gaming nerds, and you can kind of tell that, like the way everything is structured and all that. But you do kind of get the sense that they're being told, hey, you are doing this to make Disney money. You've got to get copies sold. So you got to send it out to these Targets and Walmarts, get it out to mom and pop shops. And, well, okay, not mom and pop shops. Mom and pop need to pick this up at Target after Sunday church, as opposed to the couple thousand acne-ridden, glasses-wearing, pocket protector nerds in their basements. It's got to be a wider crowd. And so you can kind of see that as like a struggle in the game design. But I think they've done pretty well balancing that so far.
Yeah, I think so too. Especially with the recent expansion, I think really proves that they're willing to go beyond that, initial, like, because a lot of the first two expansions, for the most part, didn't really introduce anything super groundbreaking that was like brain busting. Maybe the only thing that was super like above like thinking process was Dr. Facilier's fortune deck, and maybe to some extent flipping the rat token with Ratigan. Like those two things I think broke the game a little bit just because of how things operate. But the new expansion with Cruella's tokens or puppy tokens, Pete's gold tokens, Mother Gothel constantly moving a hero around, they realized that us players do want something a little bit more, more advanced, I want to say. And it's very clear, and I've also talked about this in the Discord, that it's very clear that the development of this game, when they first probably made the first 6 villains, they knew it was going to be a hit. So they went ahead and probably designed the other original 6 expansion villains. So because you can tell that their overarching design is very the same. While the newest set definitely was done after all those characters were kind of finished. And there's probably some other characters we don't know about yet that probably also have some unique gimmicky stuff that make them a little bit more advanced down the road. And in my experience, usually with games with expansions, usually the whole point of the expansion is, all right, you know what the core game is. Now let's kind of introduce this new stuff. And I definitely think that's also been probably a tackle, because when you want to introduce these popular characters, you also want to make sure they're not too overly complicated, like even I was part of this crowd when like we first got Evil Comes Prepared. It's like, why is Scar so difficult? Why is the Lion King guy the one that everyone's like saying he's not very good, he's not very fun? And granted, I figured him out. I think he's a lot more fun now, and now actually sitting down and kind of playing it out. But
honestly,
you don't
I think a lot of the Scar nonsense was a bit overblown. Like when Evil Comes Prepared came out, and I saw the Scar cards, I was like putting together in my head, okay, yeah, I can see how this works. He seemed very Maleficent-y. But then like everyone on Board Game Geek and then on Discord are like, oh, Scar is so terrible. He's awful. He just loses all the time. He's so slow. He gets Hakuna Matata into oblivion. I'm just like, have you played Scar? Have you read his cards? He's fine.
Yeah, and that's what I learned too. Like Scar, and this goes into the whole learning the game is, one of the things, especially because I was new to the game at that time. Like I had just like gotten into it and like haven't really delved super deep into the game. But as I delved deeper, I realized those different mechanics. And I think when a new player jumps into this game, they have to be willing to kind of open their eyes to some things. Because with Scar, I've been talking about this recently. He is a very risk-reward type of character. And if you get lucky and you are risky and you are well on your risk, let me tell you, that man is a monster. But if you aren't, well, you're going to get Hakuna Matata to death, and then, or you're going to have Mufasa with a prophecy and a stick.
I mean, most times when I've won with Scar, it's been I use up the very last of my resources to get myself over 15. Like I have like a couple more hyenas and the only hero left is Zazu. And like I just wipe off my board and I just cross my fingers and hold on to my injustice and hope they don't get a Hakuna Matata.
Yeah.
And if they do get a Hakuna Matata, I'm probably screwed and I'm not going to win. But you got to at least try.
Yeah. And that's the thing though, is when you're learning this game, you have to kind of like, you have to be open to those types of things with these characters, because even if we want to dive into a character like Ursula, like I think we all can agree that Ursula is one of the more difficult characters to get a handle on, but like her whole gameplay mechanic and like her routes is pretty straightforward. It's just we won't debate on if it's fun or whatnot, but it's very difficult to get to that situation, but you have to kind of put in the time to figuring it out. And then once you do, you can. It's just more of, and that's why I really don't like pulling Ursula out for new players, is because even if you're gonna let them play solitaire, it's still very just like, oh wow, there's these moving parts and I have to do this. And if for whatever reason they have both the items out and I magically play Ariel for whatever reason, they're just like, what? I have to take the mermaid out? And I have to work
out of all the villains, Ursula probably needed a bit more workshopping, and then second most would probably be Jafar. And like I remember, like they did that like whole 8-minute behind the scenes video of how they were making the game, and they said that Jafar was the first one they got down pat, and then they wanted to refine the others to play similarly to Jafar. But I think Jafar also probably needed a little bit more workshopping. Like I posted in the Discord a while back about how like 3 of the base game villains at least needed an effect added to their fate pile of something along the lines of like Once Upon a Dream or Hakuna Matata or Lightning Bolt. Just a reactive effect that wasn't centered around a hero, that would be a one-time thing and then could be ignored, that could constantly shunt you back. So you didn't have a game state where you literally could not lose. So Ursula and Jafar can both get themselves to a game state where they cannot lose. There is no fate card that can make them not lose.
Right. Yeah, it's difficult. I definitely agree. I mean, Jafar requires more work. I mean, in terms of getting to that point, but it's still very achievable. With Ursula, it's very like you have to basically play. You have to teach the player to play Ursula in that way where, all right, you have to lock yourself to the point where the opponent can't do anything to you. And
Even then, like, honestly, people keep saying they want to do this degenerate fading strategy with Ursula, and sure, that can work. I don't think it's necessary as Ursula. I think you can win very handily as Ursula without doing that. You need to mill your deck a lot,
right.
but you don't need to degeneratively fate. You need the trident, you need the crown, you need the Ursula's layer contract, and you need something that moves Triton. And that's it. And maybe you want your change forms so you can lock things strategically to keep Ariel away from your stuff.
Yeah. Yeah. I am on the band of, Ursula was built to be a fast character, and then what ended up happening was everyone's like, "Oh wow, she's slow. We all need a fate. We need a fate spam with her as much as possible, and she has the tools to do it." And I'm just like, no. If you do that with a first-time player, they're gonna cry. No. I actually remember one of my friends I taught this game to a long time ago, and he was telling me that he actually played it before with his fiance. And his fiance played Ursula for the first time. And because of playing Ursula as her first character, she never played the game again. I don't necessarily know why, if it was like, if Ursula's like gameplay mechanic was just not fun, or they got Ariel to death. I don't know. But just like, no.
So I have one friend. She refuses to play Villainous. And I actually like talked to her a little bit recently about why. And like she had like expressed sentiments before. She's only played it a couple times, and in the couple times she's played it, she doesn't like the fact that, at least for the base game and even for the first couple expansions, every villain has to mill. You're going to spend a lot of time just discarding stuff to get to your better stuff. And I think that's mainly a feature of the original six, where there was a very high emphasis placed on you have a key card in your deck and you got to hunt through your deck to get it. I think that's less of an issue now with the later ones, especially like Mother Gothel and Cruella de Vil. They work a little better with what you've got.
Yeah.
Whereas like Captain Hook, you got to hunt for that map. You got to hunt for your worthy opponents. And she didn't really like that particular aspect of it. And she also didn't really like, from the asymmetry perspective, that you really need to know specifically what everyone else is doing in order to actually play well. Because she is definitely a competitive gamer. And while she did appreciate the theme, she didn't necessarily want to invest the time to learn every single other character on the board and her own character just to play, because she doesn't like playing in the dark. Like, she would rather everyone have the same information, and I can certainly appreciate that. I have already put in the legwork to learn all the other villains.
Which you have. Bless your soul.
She doesn't seem to like playing games that she doesn't know how to play, but the person she's playing against does.
That's an interesting.
So she doesn't play Dominion with me.
Yeah, that's an interesting kind of take, because, like, you know, we were both very in the know on this game, and you obviously probably know the stuff better than I do. But like, you definitely have to know your opponent's villain to know like what they're doing, what cards they're looking for, based off like where they are currently in their plan, when you should fate them, when you grab two cards, which card you should choose. And then also, like, all right, how, you know, these are the cards I pulled so far in the opponent's fate deck. How many more do I need to get to, let's say, pull out a Zeus, or pull out an Ariel, or pull out, you know, Robin Hood, or whoever, you know, like what you have to, there's so much knowledge going in that. And I think the game, the designers have also done a good job where, like, the main heroes, I would say, are usually the big bombs. In terms of doing stuff, like in pointing out Hades, for example, like Zeus and Hercules are pretty devastating. And then Scar, like Simba, as much as he's also a great benefit to Scar, is also a huge detriment to Scar. And they've done a good job of letting a new player kind of understand that, ooh, it's like I just pulled the legendary card out of this booster pack of whatever trading card game I'm playing. I want that character, you know.
Yeah.
Which I think is also really good on the designers for doing that. Because I think it helps a lot, especially when you're first learning the game and you don't necessarily know the deck like we do, where you're like, I want to pull the popular characters, and usually the popular characters are the ones that have the better abilities, which I think is amazing in terms of design.
I feel like it's interesting with like the less well-known villains, like routine. Like I, so I am a inveterate Disney nerd. So I already have seen all these movies. I already know all these characters. But then, pretty much every time I show this to someone, there is at least one villain from a movie they haven't seen. Typically, it's Ratigan.
Yeah.
But I've also gotten people who haven't seen The Lion King, haven't seen The Emperor's New Groove, haven't seen 101 Dalmatians, haven't seen Tangled, um, haven't seen Alice in Wonderland, or like there's usually at least that they haven't seen. But they still will like, oh, that looks like a cool character. I'll go with them.
Interesting. How does it when you so like when I was playing this game, I'm not like a huge Disney veteran. I've actually, even on the Marvel, when we did the Marvel stuff, I told people I'm probably more of a Marvel fan than I am Disney, but I've seen all these Disney movies except for The Great Mouse Detective. But then when the game came out, I watched The Great Mouse Detective. But I wonder when someone approaches a villain they never played before, how that makes them feel. Because I think one of the biggest things with this game is that the theme is so strong that, I mean, that's why I think playing Scar is so fun to me, because I have a huge attachment to The Lion King. And like, when you're playing these cards, you're actually like, you're learning as you go, like, oh, I'm actually putting into plan of, oh, I'm defeating Mufasa. And then after I defeat Mufasa, I'm trying to take over the Pride, the Pride lands and stuff like that. I think that's great. But I played Ratigan before watching the movie, and I remember being like, all right, so there's these gears, there's this robot queen. Was it Bartholomew was also like, why is this guy like doesn't cost anything? He's at 1 strength and he doesn't do anything. And then you're like, oh, that's why.
I was very heartily amused when I read Bartholomew for the first time because I'd seen the movie. But from my perspective, where I have seen all these movies before, and so going into them and like playing all these characters, now while there are definitely some movies I like better than others, I pick who I want to play as either like on a rotating basis, like, oh, I haven't played this one in a while. But like my old standbys are, I like their gameplay. So personally, I'm not really a big fan of The Lion King. I think it's horribly overrated, but I find Scar really fun to play. Maybe that's partly the whole everyone hates him and I am just contrary. But I also just he's fun to play. I like playing his deck. Or like Snow White isn't the most interesting movie ever made. I mean, certainly historically important. It was basically the first animated feature film that was successful. But Evil Queen is a lot of fun to play.
Yeah. I definitely agree, because like I'll tell you up front, like not seeing the Great Mouse Detective, when I was first playing this game, Ratigan was one of my through and throughs, like constantly. I really enjoyed that character. And even like I like, was it Princess and the Frog? I almost forgot the movie for a second. I've never seen the movie, or I had seen the movie but didn't remember a lot of it. And then like watching it again when the game was out, like I had the game fresh in my brain. I was like watching The Doctor, and I was like, oh wow, this really clicks with me, and I really just want to play this character just because I think he's a cool character. He's got some cool looking art. He's got some cool effects on him, and I can feel like that character. But then there's like characters like Ursula. As much as I also really like The Little Mermaid, but I despise Ursula's gameplay. But I remember when we were doing our Ursula show, and I was literally running Ursula matches, playing as Ursula for like 4 or 5 games straight one day, and I was like, I can't do this anymore. This is killing me. It's destroying my soul. I don't know if there's really a character that really stands out to me where like I didn't necessarily like the movie, but I really enjoy their gameplay. I think Ratigan's the really only big standout to me. So I wish I would have gotten that experience. Hopefully when we get some more characters, I can have that type of experience, because some of these other characters that we are kind of getting teased at, I know you're a big fan of the Horn King. I have never actually seen the Black Cauldron. I would like to. You can smite me now or you can smite me later, one of the two. But I've also never seen The Sword in the Stone. So like seeing Madam Mim get into the game would be really good. And if we do get like a Lady Tremaine, it's been a long time since I've seen Cinderella, so it'd be kind of cool to like kind of jump back in there and kind of rediscover the movie as we play.
I do think Lady Tremaine is pretty much a given if they are going to do more. Like similar, I think Gaston and Lady Tremaine are the only real guarantees left.
I agree. Although they've been teasing the hell out of the Horned King and Oogie Boogie. They better not be lying to us.
He's saying like only Hen Wen knows. Like you better deliver.
Yeah, you better not be messing with my heart. Because if I don't get my bag of bugs, I will riot. I will take my.
I will be perfectly happy with that Oogie.
I know you Oogie Boogie hater through and through. You don't like the bag. But
I don't think he's compelling, and I don't think the movie counts as Disney canon.
No,
so,
I do kind of understand where you're coming from, because it's kind of the same thing. And we talked about this a long time ago with like having Shan Yu in the game, because like the only reason why we want that character is because of Mulan. You like the Mulan character. Like with me, with Nightmare Before Christmas, I'm really attached to Jack Skellington, and I do think Oogie's like a cool villain. He's not in it for very long, which doesn't really give him a lot to work with. But I mean, you want that representation of Nightmare Before Christmas. You know, it kind of goes in the same hand. So I can see where you're coming from. But yeah, no, there's lots to really kind of dive into about this whole teaching Villainous conversation, because I think there's a lot of different ways you can approach it. And I think you always have to make sure when you go into this game, even when you're playing it for the millionth time like I have, you got to go into it with an open mind. And make sure that you're willing to teach yourself something new. Because I mean, even like I play Scar all the time, but I was playing Evil Queen recently, and I completely forgot what all the damn ingredients do. And I was like, this is why this character's busted, because she just has so many tools. I just don't know them all.
She does. She straight up has a tutor in her deck. Like she has 2 copies of it, and the magic tomes are just insane.
They're
like
busted.
Evil Queen and Dr. Facilier are so busted, and they have the same set with poor Hades.
James Woods is not happy. He found out about his characters at a board game, and he's like, "Hey, why is my character not good? Why is this happening? Why are these 2 no-shows?"
He's a slower villain. It takes him a little bit of time.
Yeah, it's true. Although I have to say, Dr. Facilier is a busted character that I love so much. Just because his bustedness is fun. I enjoy how busted he is. He's a good busted. I think that's it. Do you have anything else you would like to talk about in terms of this?
I think I have exhausted what thoughts I had coming into this.
Well, that makes 2 of us. I think we had some good conversations today. I hope you folks listening to the show will take some of this and apply it to when you try to teach the game, or even like learn a new character for yourself. Just kind of go in with, these types of tactics. I think there was a lot to say. And also when we were talking about this imaginative ruling topic. Now, granted, obviously if something says you can't do it, don't do it. But make sure that when you're also playing the game, that like if you see a situation like that, you kind of evaluate and be like, am I trying to put the game in a box? Or should I let what's going on right here, be open? Because I never want someone to feel like they can't do something just because someone else says they can. And in theory, the whole intent with this game is that you should be able to do a lot. Although there's some limitations, obviously. But anyway, well, thank you for joining me, Wero. I appreciate you hopping back on with us. This was a great show. Seriously, lots of good information.
Yeah.
Anyway. Well, folks, I'll see you folks next time. I don't know what the next topic is going to be. Right now, the world is in a weird place. So, but until then, stay safe, stay healthy, and as always, stay wicked.